Hello and welcome to the eOrganic webinar on outwintering the organic dairy herd. My name is Deb Haliba and I work at the University of Vermont Extension as eOrganic's Dairy Team Coordinator. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with eExtension, and you can find all of our published articles, videos, and upcoming and recorded webinars at eextension.org/organic_production. This presentation is being recorded, and you'll be able to find the recording on our website as well as on our YouTube channel within the coming week. If you do plan to share the recording or the information presented today with others, we would greatly appreciate acknowledgement of eOrganic and today's presenter. Before we get started, I wanted to give a quick overview of our agenda here. So Brad will give his presentation for about 45 minutes. And then we'll ask you to respond to 2 quick poll questions that will pop up on your screen. And then finally, we will hold a question and answer session with Brad for the remaining of our session, which ends at 1/4 the hour. If you would like to ask a question, you'll type it into the question box, which is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Following the webinar, we will send you a short email survey, and we'd be really grateful if you could fill that out to give us your feedback. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dr. Brad Heins is an assistant professor in the Department of Animal Science at the University of Minnesota, focusing on organic dairy production. Currently, Brad conducts his research at the University of Minnesota's West Central Research and Outreach Center. The center has a 100-head certified organic dairy herd as well as a 130-head grazing herd. Brad, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm just going to turn it right over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about outwintering dairy cattle today, and it's been a great topic of interest in the upper Midwest within the last number of years. There's quite a few producers conducting outwintering on their farm, and we decided to undertake it in a research setting as well to see what we could find. My presentation today is going to focus on a little bit of considerations for outwintering organic dairy cattle. It's got quite a few pictures in here from our research station here at Morris, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some research that we've done the last couple years related to outwintering lactating cows and some of the consequences on fly management that come along with that. So first I want to start here. This is what it looked like in November 9th, just a couple weeks ago. We were doing some cover crop research on our dairy here, and then we had a nice snowstorm, about 10 inches of snow here in Minnesota, and our cows were done grazing that day and decided that we were going to start our outwintering study the day after we were grazing. So it certainly can change quite quickly, the weather, and you almost have to be prepared for what happens in outwintering. But anyways, a little bit of background on our dairy herd. We have a certified organic dairy here in Minnesota. Right now, about 113 cows. You can see the production figures there. A little bit maybe lower than the conventional herd that we have here because we don't push those cows as high. Feed prices organic are quite high, so we don't quite get as much production out of there, but milk price remains quite stable. In our conventional herd, we get about 60 pounds of milk, so not quite as high a production as what you would see on a typical conventional freestall barn, but this is more of a low input conventional herd, and milk price is pretty decent there. And we work with a lot of different dairy breeds in our herd, Holstein, Jersey, and some crossbred cows, Montbéliard, Viking Red, and Normandy in all of a crossbreeding scheme. So that's all what's really included in our herd. We have about 400 acres of certified organic pasture that's available, and where we do a lot of our outwintering on as well, some of these pastures and sacrifice areas. But today, really, what I'm going to talk about is based on a organic dairy research grant that we were funded from Organic Research and Extension Initiative, where we were comparing many different aspects to grazing systems, to winter housing systems here, which is the outwintering, to fly control methods and many different aspects, and then economics at the end, to try and figure out a lot of different strategies for improving organic dairy production. So really when I talk about outwintering, we're kind of talking about reduced input dairy farming. Really today the dairy industry has become far more dependent on outside inputs. Lots of large facilities, people buying and purchasing a lot of feed, and a lot more everything coming from outside into the dairy operation. As well, barns are very expensive to maintain. You have ventilation, you have manure systems, concrete everywhere. They're very expensive to maintain. And really it's, it can be somewhat discouraging for new and beginning farmers to want to get into the dairy industry because of the high cost of establishing a lot of the dairy farms. So can reduced input farms with outwintering be a potential for these new and beginning farmers to start dairying without a lot of equity? And like I said, it does include outwintering along with many different aspects. So why is there a big interest in outwintering happening here in the Midwest and at least in the northern parts of the United States? And a lot of it has to do with, low cost versus high cost of buildings, like I said before. All the infrastructure and facilities are very expensive to maintain. And sometimes you can have diseases that are associated with close confinement, and you can avoid those certainly with outwintering. You have a lot less health problems when cows are outwintered outside. And we really don't have to deal with poorly ventilated buildings. Ventilation can be a big issue in dairy production systems, and obviously when cows are outside, you don't have to worry about ventilating anything. They're out in the natural environment. Animals are generally clean when they're outwintered. As long as you have enough bedding and clean bedding, the animals stay relatively clean. Obviously, bedding costs can be reduced. You tend not to use as much bedding in outwintering systems as what you would in a typical confinement type system as well. However, with outwintering, you certainly must be able to respond to unexpected conditions very quickly. Like I showed the first couple pictures, at least here in the Midwest, weather can change from one day to the next, and you have to be able to adapt. So when we talk about preparing for outwintering, what are some considerations that a dairy producer might want to do when they're preparing to outwinter? Obviously, you want to have a secure perimeter for the cows. You want to have a fenced area so the animals cannot get out, and you want to be able to observe them easily. We're not throwing animals far away from buildings and just forgetting about them. They have to be observed every day and a couple times a day to check on their health and well-being. You want to provide shelter from winter winds. Winds can be probably the worst thing for cows that are outwintered. You can either have trees, a natural windbreak, or you can construct a windbreak as well. And I'll show you some pictures of some of the windbreaks that we have here. You want to provide a supply of drinking water. Obviously, you have to have water that's not going to freeze. Ideally, it would be nice to have cows outwintered that are very close to waters that are heated, so you don't have to worry about unfreezing waters in the middle of the winter. But providing ample drinking water is a must for outwintering animals. You also want to have a space where you're going to outwinter to prevent runoff from going into the lakes and streams when the frost comes out in the spring. A nice flat area probably works the best. And another good thing, if you're looking or thinking about preparing for outwintering, obviously you want to visit some farms that are successfully doing that. And those are probably a good thing, is to talk to other farmers and see how they do it and see what's working for their operations. Another thing is you want to avoid muddy lots because they can harbor disease a little bit. You can have more problems if you get cows in a big muddy lot. You can have feet and leg problems and a lot of mastitis problems if they're getting a lot of mud and dirt on their udders. So when the spring comes, you've got to be able to act quickly and move them into an area away from the mud if mud does happen. Another concern that some producers think about when outwintering at least animals is frostbite and what might happen. So frostbite may occur in outwintering systems. We do see it very rarely, though, on our animals. You might see on some heifers, they might get some ears that are frostbitten, which doesn't happen very often. It mostly occurs in the lactating animals where they get frostbite on their teats. And more often than not, it's occurring in fresh animals. So if you're calving cows during the middle of the winter and those wet teats are exposed, you might have a little bit more incidence of frostbite on those animals. And then obviously as the temperature decreases, the animal needs more feed for maintenance, and therefore you probably have to feed them more, and the intake of those animals will increase when the temperature gets cold. So weather, I think, is probably one of the big things that you have to adjust, and some of these things are the same. Mud can be certainly a big problem in the fall, especially if you get a lot of rain in November, which we may happen, and then again when the frost is coming out. If you're outwintering milking cows, you want to provide a pack that's obviously going to protect the udder of the cow. You want to provide some warmth to that udder and shield it from the wind so you don't have the frozen teat problem like I had before. You obviously want to have dry bedding because you will have less frozen teats or hardly any if the bedding is dry. Dry bedding is a must. And in some organic situations, at least here in the Midwest, our certifier allows us to use a dry teat dip powder that's formulated for use in cold weather. We use it below about 15 degrees temperature, and it will help reduce the risk of frostbitten teats. We do use it when it's very cold outside. If we use it, we like to not use it for more than about a week or 2 weeks straight because it does dry the teats off and teats become chapped a little bit more. So we like to go back to our teat dip to provide some conditioning for the udders. So a few considerations for outwintering heifers. Obviously you can use some straw or some bedding that they can lie on. It's really good to provide bedding for those heifers because they're able to conserve heat in the wintertime and not use so much or dissipate so much heat. You must have a shelter, like I said before, either trees, windbreak, and some people do provide a portable shelter out in the pastures for outwintering their heifers. I think a big key is watching those animals, monitoring their growth rates. Here we do weigh animals during the winter. We take body weights on them to measure how those animals are growing throughout the winter, and trying to maintain about 1.5 pounds of gain per day is probably a good goal or target what you should achieve for outwintering those heifers. And one thing is if those animals are losing condition, I think you probably need to bring them inside. You obviously don't want animals to lose condition on an outwintering system because that can be very bad news for those heifers, and bringing them inside will help them may put back on more weight if they've lost it to outwintering. So I want to look at a few pictures that we have in some of our facilities and describe a little bit about outwintering what we have. So we do outwinter calves. These are pre-weaned calves. They are, you could call them outwintered. We have them in super hutches where they are exposed to the outdoor world in a group housing situation. And they do well. We maintain about 1.8 to 2 pounds of growth on these heifers as long as we provide them clean and dry bedding. If our older animals, heifers, can be outwintered. You can see here that they are outwintered together in large groups in the middle of the winter time. But we have really feeding areas where those heifers are raised. We do a lot of breeding of our heifers in these outwintering lots. You can see we provide ample space in inverted tractor tires where we feed TMR in the wintertime to these heifers. And you can, in the background, there's some trees, and there's actually a ravine down there where heifers can go and to get out of the wind if they need to when the weather is quite nasty. But otherwise, they do quite well when we're wintering the heifers. Here's another picture of a different group. We have our springing heifers, so heifers that are going to calve in March to May. They're outwintered as well in these pasture areas. So this is a pasture that we have. You can see the trees there that provide shelter for heifers, and if it gets really bad, the wind is quite strong, they can go into those trees, treed-in areas, and really get out of the wind. I've been in there with those heifers before in that area, and when the wind is blowing quite hard, there's not much wind at all moving through those areas. So it does provide shelter for those heifers. When we're feeding heifers in outwintering areas, there's a lot of different ways you can feed heifers in the outwintering space. Here you can see we have some hay rings where we're feeding some round bales, and we have to move those constantly throughout the winter to be able to find a new feeding area to get out of the manured area and any hay that was wasted on the ground. So you can move those hay rings, and in turn it does provide additional fertility to the soil and fertility to the pastures that you might be outwintering on if you move the hay rings around and provide that feed there. Another way that some farms have actually done outwintering is done some bale grazing, where you set all of the bales out on the pasture. Here, this was from a few years ago, and you sort of fence the area and then provide them new bales every few days, and they just keep moving along down until you run out of hay bales and have to add more bales. But that's a different way, probably a lot less labor for outwintering there. You don't have to start a tractor up every day. You just have to go down and move a fence every couple days and provide new feed for those heifers. So a little bit about the two winter housing systems in our research study that we're going to talk about here. We really wanted to compare some systems for housing cattle in the wintertime. And one was a straw pack, so obviously we have no building cost. It's an open space, well ventilated. However, you may see an increase in feed costs on a straw pack depending on if those animals need to eat more by being outside. And then here in the upper Midwest, some people are using compost barns bedded with wood shavings for a winter housing system as well, and organic systems. And however, you've got the building costs that go along with it, but you're able to control your manure management as well. And then we want to look at fly control methods, and do any of these systems produce more flies for the summertime, which can be a big issue in organic dairy production. So when we talk about compost barns, we're talking about a loose housing facility that is bedded with sawdust. and has a feeding area for those cows. Here you can see a feed bunk that those cows are fed a TMR during the winter and loose housing in the back. The bedding area is bedded with sawdust and wood shavings. Here's a picture of a newly, we started the new compost barn here this year, and after a clean out over the summer, and we provide it with shavings in there, and we actually stir it twice a day to provide a breakdown of the manure and the sawdust for those cows in that area. In the compost barn, this was from last year. It was very cold here in the Midwest. I'll show you some temperatures in a second. However, it can be a problem when it does get cold in these situations where you have a lot of manure buildup around the feed bunks. If it gets really cold, that manure builds up quite quickly and can become a problem when the cows are in an outwintering system. However, for the most part, the cows are well comfortable. They provide adequate feed and adequate space. They can go outdoors as well in a compost system, but they're a little bit more confined away from the wind and in more close proximity. Here's just a picture of some cows. They're laying on a newly tilled compost barn that we have. However, when we get to the winter time, when it gets really cold, when temperatures can be at least here in Morris in the last year they were minus 30 Fahrenheit with the wind, the compost barn can become not a bedded pack barn. You can see a lot of frozen manure clumps around this area. When it gets really cold, the compost barn is very difficult to work with because of the cold. However, during the winter time, you may have to clean out if you don't have a large enough compost barn. At least in the Midwest here, like I said, it can be cold. It doesn't really compost as nice as what it should because of the cold weather. So you may have to clean it out during the middle of the winter time, and that's what we're doing here is taking a little bit of that compost out. You can see all the steam that's rising off of there. So there is some heat action working in that compost barn, but you may have to clean some of that out. So the straw packs, here's a view of the straw pack that we have for our outwintering cows. Really how we establish the straw pack is we go out there with a manure spreader, and put two large square bales in the back and basically run them out the back end, and that's how we really establish our pack, and that's how we bed it. Even during the winter time, is go out there with the manure spreader and drive over it to provide new and clean straw for those cows. And this is kind of what it looks like after they've bedded that area. You've got a nice new dry place for those animals to lay on, and you want to make sure that the pack is large enough, obviously, for cows. So when you have smaller amount of cows in there, you can see here we just started a pack, and we obviously there's only one cow here, but a few smaller cows, you don't need as big a pack area as what you have. However, when we get into the winter time areas, you can see the pack does have manure on it. Obviously, you want to keep that dry with prevent from a lot of that manure from building up on there. And when you do that, you can certainly provide a nice laying spot for those cows to lay on. And most of them will lay directly on top of that pack because that's where most of the dry bedding is and the dry area. However, one thing that you have to deal with in outwintering situations like this is obviously the winter. Here, cows are outside when it's snowing out, and it may look tough to some, but those cows are doing quite well. We're monitoring those, and they do well out on those systems. Here, this is how we feed them in a TMR and some feed bunks outside. here from our milking facilities, and they're provided with enough feed to go out there in outwintering. So this next picture is sort of what an outwintering lot looks like. This was taken last year during one of our nice windstorms, but on the right is some cows. They're out in the feed bunk eating some TMR. In the middle is a man-made windbreak that we've established. You can see that we also have some trees in the back that are providing windbreak, and it's a little bit hard to see the straw pack because of the wind and the snow that is happening. So, after a nice snowstorm, you might this might be what it looks like. You've got a lot of snow blowed up on that pack. So what you need to do is you need to adjust your bedding schedule and being able to go out there and bed more often when you have inclement weather conditions to provide ample and clean and dry bedding. But overall, the cows are free to go outside and mingle around with each other in the outwintering lot. And here's another picture that we have from our windbreak that we provide for those cows out on the pasture. And the last picture here that I have before we talk about the research study is this is what can happen in the springtime when the frost is coming out and you might get some spring rains. It might turn to mud quite quickly around that straw pack. And then you have to find a place for those cows to go, because obviously you don't want your cows walking through a lot of mudded areas like that and making a lot of mess. So that is a consequence of some of the outwintering activities that are happening. So really what we're going to do now is talk about a project that we are working on to compare the two winter housing systems for a variety of different aspects, from production to dry matter intake and body weight of those animals. So really we had two treatments. We had an indoor system, which was a compost bedded pack barn. They were bedded with sawdust shavings and fed outside in the feed bunks like I showed. And we had the outdoor system bedded with straw, no shelters, some tree windbreaks. And we evaluated these for 2 different winter seasons for 2 different years. And really we kind of bedded the groups as needed. Obviously the compost barn was stirred twice a day, and we added bedding about every 3 days. This is sort of a schematic description of what an outwintering lot may look like. If you were to establish a winter lot, we try to keep the feeding area away from the bedded pack, so there's 2 distinct areas for feeding and bedding, so cows aren't making a mess around the bedded pack if you're trying to feed close to that. And really our straw piles, our bedded pack piles, tend to be about 40 feet by 80 feet. That's what we start out with, and then we keep adding straw and building that pack up. So a little bit about the temperatures that we've dealt with here in Minnesota the last few winters. This was 2012 2013. You can see the average temperatures here in the Midwest are around 15 degrees during the winter time, and the low temperatures can be down to minus 15 or minus 20 in those months. We did have quite a bit of snow in 2012 2013, especially in February there, where we had 19 inches of snow in the winter time. In contrast, the last winter that we had was obviously a lot colder. Average temperatures were about 10 degrees colder here, averaging about 6 degrees between December, January, and February. It started to warm up in the spring, but you'll notice some low temperatures, minus 24 there in January, so it was quite cold, and we didn't have as much snow that we saw the previous year. So those are different weather conditions that we have to deal with. So in our study, we had the first 2 years, we compared about 80 cows each in each of the compost and the straw pack barns. And then we had various combinations of our Holsteins and crossbred animals that we used in this study. So these are the results for body weight, body condition score. You'll notice not much, a big difference there in body weight, about 80 pounds more for those cows on the straw pack. They had a little bit more weight, but they had a tendency for a little bit less body condition because they were outside. But really not much difference between the body condition score for the cows that were housed on the compost or the straw pack. So here are the results for the production of those animals. You'll notice that really there's no difference in production. 34 pounds of milk on the compost barn cows and 33 pounds on the straw pack cows. They were all fed the same TMR, so they were all milking about the same. Fat percent and protein percent was the same for those cows. You'll find somatic cell score, really not much of a difference there, 2.75 versus 2.8 outside on the straw pack, so really low somatic cell scores. And our MUN levels were a little bit low because of a little bit lower protein levels in our diets because of high feed cost. But overall, we saw no difference in production between the two housing systems. We also scored these cows for hygiene, so we wanted to look at basically how clean these cows were. So we scored cows every 2 weeks for hygiene conditions on various parts of the cow's body. There were really no differences in hygiene scores in the tail, the upper or the lower legs for these cows. They were all about the same score. However, cows in the compost barn had higher hygiene scores on their belly as well as their udder. So that indicated that there was more manure, or the cows in the compost barn were a little bit dirtier than cows on the straw pack. From a 1.7 versus 1.5 on an udder score is probably not a big biological difference in hygiene for those animals. So, but it was statistically significant. However, we did find that cows had Hox scores that were higher in the straw pack, and we found no differences in locomotion. All the cows moved quite freely, and we didn't have any cows that were limping or anything like that. We took bedding samples of all of these, the bedding that we used in these animals. Here are the clean bedding results. Really quite low bacteria counts for our compost, which was our clean shavings, wood dust, and our straw pack. Was a little bit higher in some circumstances because that's coming more out of the field as well. However, when we looked at the bedding cultures, we took bedding cultures every 2 weeks from these straw packs to see if there was bacteria growing in this bedding substrate. And we found a higher level of coliforms in compost barns than we did out on the straw packs, almost double the amount of colonies per milliliter that we saw on the straw pack. So there was higher coliform count, but overall, really not much difference in bacteria counts when you look at the compost barn versus the straw pack, except for the coliforms. So what about feed intake? A lot of people talk about feed intake and how much these cows are going to eat if they're outwintered like that. So these are what basically the cow's feed intake was in pounds per cow per day for the two systems. About 90 pounds as fed in the compost and 89 in the straw pack. On a dry matter basis, very similar, 40 pounds versus 42. So there really wasn't any big difference in dry matter intake for these cows, depending on what system they were in. They ate about the same. Obviously, they have the same production, so they were going to be eating about the same amount of dry matter intake. So the cows that were outside did not eat more than the cows that were in the compost barn. We look at the bedding total across both of the years of the study. This is how many pounds of bedding that we used. We used a significant amount of bedding in the compost barn as well as the straw packs. You can see the bedding costs there. The compost bedding is cheaper than straw. Obviously, straw is very expensive uh, and hard to find, at least here in the Midwest. Organic straw, that's about $180 a ton. Straw, but you can see that really we probably used, we had less cost in our straw pack than we did in our compost barn. So certainly an advantage in that. We wanted to look at the behavior of these animals and what happens. So we have a behavioral and activity monitoring system on our cows. You can see this is what they look like on green grass pastures that we're hoping to see in a few months again, but they have neck collars around their neck that measure their activity and rumination. So typically this is what animals look like in the winter for their activity. That activity is in activity units measured by the monitoring system, and rumination is in minutes per day. So we basically find that activity is quite low in January and February because it's a lot colder in December, but then activity goes up in March and April when it starts to get warmer out there, being a little bit more active. Now rumination, it doesn't change a whole lot. Rumination's quite high in December, January, and February, obviously because the cows are probably resting more in the barn or on the straw pack because of the cold weather, and so they're doing some more rumination, and rumination kind of goes down and comes back up in March and April. We look at our breed groups for activity and rumination depending whether they're out in the two systems, and really no big difference between breeds for activity level or rumination. So we're pretty confident that all the animals are adapting quite well to the two systems that we have based on our activity and rumination. So when we compare the two groups for activity, we find that cows in the compost barn do have a little bit more activity, and I'll explain that here in a minute on a graph that we have. But rumination is about the same. We found no difference in rumination in minutes per day, whether those cows are indoors or outdoors. Maybe slightly less, 20 minutes less per day, but not a big difference whether they were indoors or outdoors. This is kind of what the activity looks like of those cows over a 24-hour time period. You'll notice a couple big spikes on the cows we have indoor, so that's our compost barn cows. Basically, they have to walk a little bit further from the milking parlor to their compost barn, so you'll see a little bit of a spike there. Most of that is related to milking activity, at least in those big spikes. But you can see most of the activity is during the day for those cows from about 8 a.m. till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they're doing a lot of their eating and they're resting at night. Rumination, on the other hand, quite different. Rumination tends to go up midnight, 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning. That's when cows are resting. They're just like people, they need to rest overnight. So we're seeing that uptick in rumination during the overnight period because they're doing a lot of resting, and during the day they're doing more eating. That's why rumination goes down. So in the last part here, we wanted to just discuss a few conditions for production of stable flies from these two bedding packs. Obviously, flies are a big issue in organic dairy production, and what are we working with Roger Moon at University of Minnesota here, an entomologist, to look at what these two systems are doing for fly production. We've got so we wanted to look at obviously stable flies was the big thing because they're very significant pests for dairy cows, and they come mostly from organic bedding material. And really recent research has shown that straw bedding has produced higher numbers of flies than wood chips or sand bedding when we worked in outdoor calf hutches. And you'll notice that from that research study, it shows that there's quite a bit more flies in straw bedding. And we wanted to try and quantify what the fly levels were coming out of our two systems that we had. So basically we measured stable fly emergence, and I'll show you how we did that in a second. From these two systems, we didn't disturb them after the cows came out of there to go to pasture in the summer, so we just left them, and to see how many flies would be produced out of those two systems. And obviously our big goal was to try and minimize the stable fly activity during the summer and see if we could get reduced flies. So this is how we did our measuring system. Obviously the cows were in their winter housing systems through the winter, and then when they went to pasture, we actually put emergence traps and sticky traps at the wintering sites throughout the summer and into September and October to measure that. So these are our sticky traps. We placed those around each of the straw packs to see what sort of flies we were capturing coming out of these areas, and if there was a difference between the two lots. And basically we were just looking at a way to measure the overall abundance of flies coming out of these two systems based on these sticky traps. We also had fly emergence traps that we placed on the straw packs. You can see on the right hand side our straw pack with a lot of these emergence traps on. We put about 30 traps on each specific location. So we had 2 straw packs and 2 compost barn bays that we put in. So we had 120 emergence traps where we looked at the fly prevalence coming out of theirs. So these are the sticky traps that we the fly levels that were captured on the sticky traps here. This was recent data from 2014, comparing whether we were in a compost barn or we had an east and a west straw lot. Basically, we saw no difference. There were a lot of flies flying around the compost barns as well as the straw lots after the cows had vacated them. So we saw quite a few fly loads. Obviously, the number of flies go up quite significantly from May to July and start tapering off into September. But really, flies were everywhere. So these were actually the fly counts that came out of those packs. So based on the emergence traps, we were capturing flies. They would fly up out of the straw pack into the white bucket and get captured in there. So they couldn't escape. So we could count how many flies that were escaping based on our emergence trap, and then sort of extrapolate the number of flies that were actually being produced in those different situations. Now here's the data from 2013 and 2014. You'll notice, I think in a nutshell, the blue and the red lines are the lowest, so we're producing a lot less stable flies out of compost barns than we do out of the straw packs. In 2013, one of the straw packs was producing a lot more flies than the other ones, and I think there's a lot of weather conditions that might have played into that as well. That was the pack that got the sun heated up every morning, so there was a little bit more flies probably generated out of there because the pack got hotter quite earlier in the day than the other one. But in 2014, we saw similar results. The two straw lots produced a lot more flies than we saw flies being produced out of the 2 compost barns. So I think in conclusion here, basically we found no difference in production between cows that were raised in a compost barn or the outdoor straw pack. Obviously, we found that cows weighed more; they had more body weight than cows that were indoor. And then basically the cost to bed those cows was almost not quite double, but the sawdust cost was a little bit higher because we used a lot more sawdust bedding throughout the 2 years. And if we can put up with the weather here in a northern climate, the cows really feel hardly any effects by being outdoors, whether they're in a moderate or northern cold climate. Our cows maybe were a little bit dirtier in the compost barn than we saw on the outside, based on our hygiene scores. And really, the housing systems, we found that we're going to produce more flies out of straw packs than we will out of a compost barn. So we'd sort of recommend if you are going to outwinter that you want to get that straw pack cleaned up as soon as possible. Obviously, we left it because we wanted to be able to determine how many flies would be produced. But the faster you can clean up that area and get it spread out onto fields or pastures, the better off you'll be in generating less flies. So sort of the couple take-home message slides and what are the best conditions for outwintering. Obviously, you want to provide ample windbreaks. You want to be prepared to move those animals if there's hazardous conditions, if you need to get them to a different area or get them into some trees to stay out of the wind. You've got to be able to do that quite quickly and maybe anticipate the weather. You want animals in good condition before they go into the outwintering lot. You want to be in good condition so they're not going to lose condition over the winter. Otherwise, you might have to bring them inside. You may have to provide some extra feed for maintenance, growth, and production. I didn't show you the breakdown for feed between the 2 years that we had, but last year when it was a lot colder, the cows probably consumed about 25% more dry matter intake than they did the year before, just because it was a lot colder. Like I showed, it was on average 10 degrees colder, and they ate more feed. And obviously you want to bed animals as needed. You want them to remain clean and comfortable in an outwintering situation. In the end, obviously you want to provide good windbreaks. For milking cows, if you're going to outwinter milking cows, the teat should be dry before they leave the milking parlor. If you don't have access to a dry powder dip, you want to dip those cows with your teat dip and maybe dry them off before they leave the milking parlor, and that might help alleviate some of the issues with frozen teats. You might need to provide additional feed. Your health problems are going to be a lot fewer in outwintering cows. We just don't see the health problems that we see in confinement operations. And really, housing under the stars, it may not be for everyone. I think it's an option that people need to explore, and for beginning farmers, it might be a good opportunity for those farmers to get into the dairy business without a lot of equity if they can provide a good windbreak and some straw and start milking cows without a lot of building space. So in the end, kind of acknowledge these two projects. The projects were funded by the USDA, NIFA, an organic grant that we received here at the University of Minnesota, and some of the behavioral work was funded by the Ceres Trust and a graduate student research grant. And certainly we want to acknowledge a lot of the graduate students, the outwintering projects. Lucas Solstrom is working on the production and health and well-being aspects, and Anna Hansen in entomology is working with a lot of the fly behavior and the fly aspects of the project. So they've contributed a lot of information to this project and a lot of help. And if you're interested in some further resources, you can go to our websites. in our West Central Research and Outreach Center. You might find some information on outwintering there. You can follow us on Facebook to see how the cows are doing on outwintering. We post pictures and stuff. And then if you're interested in compost barn and some more outwintering information, you can go to our University of Minnesota Dairy Extension website and another website on compost barns, where there's a lot of information on compost barns and housing of those cows. So last, if you have any questions or want further information, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, and we can talk about outwintering with you and how it may help your operation. And hopefully we'll be looking for the green grass at pastures in a few months. So with that, I thank you for listening today, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Well, great. Thank you. Thank you, Brad. Before we do move into our question and answer period, we just want to ask you to complete a very quick poll. And here comes the first poll question right now. So what you'll do is just respond to one of those. You'll just click right on your screen, one of those little dots there. So as a result of this webinar, do you now have a better understanding about the considerations around outwintering cattle? So if you can just click on one of those questions. We'll try to move through these really quickly so we can have enough time for to answer all your questions. Okay, and then here comes number 2. Just 2 questions today. There we go. So as a result of what you learned, will you make a change on your farm or how you advise farmers? If you could just click on one of those responses, that would be wonderful. Great. I see that you're clicking. That's awesome. And we do use this information in our future programming, so we always appreciate your feedback. Alrighty. Okay, so now we're just going to move right into our Q&A time. So as a reminder, to pose a question, what you'll do is you'll find the question box on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're using a tablet or an iPhone, you can just click on the question mark. You're just going to type in your question and hit return. If for some reason that question box is closed, you want to click on the small plus sign next to the word question to open it up. I will be reading questions out loud to Brad, and we will answer as many as we have time for. And then after the webinar, if you have additional questions, you can use our online Ask an Expert system, or just contact us directly. And so we do have some questions already in the question box here, Brad. So I will just go ahead and launch in. The first question we received was, did you see any pressure from predators for those outwintered cattle?
We don't see a lot of pressure from any predators on the outwintering cows. Now if we have baby calves, our calves are closer to the facility, so we don't put any younger animals out, but we really don't see any predator pressure from these cows that are outwintered, and there's plenty of coyotes and other animals around here that they could, but really they don't be bothered. We have large enough groups of animals that we don't see any issues.
Great. So how did you or should you handle the straw pack areas in the spring? I know you kept them there in place so you could take research, but would they typically be hauled out, the straw manure as fertilizer, and then how did you reseed that area?
So yeah, good question. We can do it 2 different ways. You can haul that straw compost out right away when the cows get turned out. You can haul that out to fields. We use it for fertilizing our organic cropland here, so we do haul it out right away. Or some people I've seen, they'll sort of pile it up and let it compost a little bit if they don't have an area to move it out right away. They can compost that, but I would recommend trying to get it out as soon as possible. Now you can reseed that right away. We've seeded some warm season grasses in there. Some sorghum Sudan grasses would do well in that area to provide some cover over the summer. Or you can seed it down. We also did some experimenting with outwintering on heifers, and we seeded it down to some cool season grasses, and they grow quite well with a lot of that nutrients in the soil. The seeds come up right away and start sprouting and do quite well after that. There's plenty of fertility for establishing a cool season or a warm season pasture.
Great. What do you recommend in terms of a bedded area to cow ratio, I'm assuming, when building the outside pack?
So our outside pack, if we, like I said, we have it's about 40 feet by 80 feet. That's the sort of area that we have. And we can put about 30 to 40 cows on there on a straw pack that's about that size. The land area that we have for the feeding area, the bedding area, and some watering, it's about a half an acre is what we do. So typically 40 cows for a half acre or is what we like to keep at. That's sort of the manageable time frame. Here we have a nice place where we're able to have 2 lots. So we have 2 lots on each side of our milking parlor, half acre each, where we can put 40 cows each throughout the winter. In our straw barn or in a compost barn, usually we have, it depends on how big the barn is and how much space you want to provide those animals. You got to have enough feed bunk space and laying space for all those cows. So I think it depends on the size of your barn, how many cows you can put in that area.
Great. And you had mentioned that you mixed the compost pack daily. What method did you use or equipment did you use to do that?
We use to store the compost barn. We use basically a digger on the front of a skid loader. I think there's a lot of methods that different people can use. That's how we use it. We stir it twice a day. We attach this to our skid loader and go in and stir it when cows are at the milking parlor. So we do it when cows are not there and are able to do that throughout the day.
Great. Did you happen to measure the difference in labor requirements between the two systems?
We have looked at labor. We haven't analyzed it yet, but that's part of the economic analysis. As far as bedding, I can tell you right offhand, it takes about 10 minutes to sort of get straw and bed the cows in the outdoor straw pack, and it's roughly about 15 minutes or so for getting our sawdust and getting animals bedded there, and then that also includes the stirring of the bedded pack. You have about 3 to 4 minutes there for each pack. So there's probably a little bit more labor associated with that compost bedded barn because of your stirring it more often. But we will look at more of the economics into the future, yes.
Excellent. So how do you collect manure in some of the outwinter feed ring or bale grazing systems, if at all?
So when we've done it in some of the areas that are out on pastures where we're doing some bale grazing, we've basically gone in there and taken a drag and basically drag the manure across. We try and scrape, if you can, when cows are out wintering, they tend to manure in one spot. At least if you're not in a bale grazing area, they tend to huddle around a spot and they manure in one area. So you can clean that up quite easily with a loader in the summer, and it's a very small area. However, if you've got it spread across, we actually go out and drag it in the wintertime and basically drag the manure all around the pasture, and it actually provides good fertility. Those pastures look pretty tough in the springtime when you got a lot of manure on it, but after you go out and drag it, that grass comes back quite nicely and provides ample grazing opportunity.
Okay, and did you have any drifting around the constructed windbreaks?
Um, no, we haven't had a lot of drifting around the constructed windbreaks that we have. It can occur. We have a little bit of space, about a foot or foot and a half between the ground and the um, the constructed windbreak, so the wind does blow through the bottom there, so it prevents a little bit of the drifting from happening. But we really see not much drifting at all around those windbreaks.
Okay. This person asks about the name of the product for that powdered teat dip, but before you answer that question, I just want to remind people you really need to check in with your certifier before you use any product like that. Okay, so now you can answer that question.
We've had it's a ice block is what it's called.
Mhm.
I think Bomatic might use it. It's a it's a chlorhexidine powder, which is in restricted use on the national organic rules, but we have been approved by our certifier to use that in certain conditions when it gets really cold. So yes, like Deb said, you need to talk to your certifiers to make sure that it's okay to use that. We are allowed to use that in certain conditions. They don't like us to use it, um, but when it does get really cold, especially last year when it was 25 degrees below zero air temperature, we used a lot of it, and it helped us out a lot. But yes, you need to check with our certifier. But Ice Block from Bomatic is what we used.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Let's see, can you remind us, did you rotate the areas that you outwinter so that the pack isn't in the same place each year?
Uh, For the lactating cows, we do not rotate the areas. We basically establish the pack in the same area because that area is close to the barn. When we're outwintering our heifers, we do rotate areas a little bit based on if we need to reseed some pastures or things like that. We'll maybe dump those animals there during the winter, provide more fertility, and then go in and seed that down, no-till seeded in the springtime.
Okay. A couple of questions about the windbreak. So what's the height of that constructed windbreak?
That constructed windbreak is about 15 feet high,
Hmm.
so it will provide um, enough block from the wind for the cows that they could stand behind it.
Okay. And then have you ever tried using stacked round bales for a windbreak?
Uh, we haven't used stacked bales for a windbreak, but I know some farms here in Minnesota that have used. They provide a little L-shaped area for a windbreak, and it works great. It will work just as good as trees or any sort of constructed man-made windbreak. Bales will work wonderful for that too. So if you have straw bales or any sort of bales that you can use, that would work as well.
Okay, great. How much of this information do you think can be extrapolated to either dairy goats and or hair sheep?
Um, well, I think a lot of the information as far as outwintering you can use, as far as the um, methods to bed those animals, the methods of providing shelter, providing a lot of water. I would suspect that in sheep and goats, you're also going to have to provide more feed for those animals in the winter. You want to keep the energy levels high because they're ruminants as well, so they're going to be very similar to cattle. So they're probably going to eat, 20% more again in the wintertime if they're outwintered. But I think a lot of the things that I talked about today are very relevant for small ruminants as well.
Okay. It looks like I think I've gone through all the questions that folks have posed. Maybe we'll just give a few more, a couple more minutes for people to just type in any last questions. And this is always the awkward time where you're just sort of waiting. Here we go. What's the orientation of the windbreak? Is it north-south, east-west?
It's a sort of, it's kind of north-south, but at a 45-degree angle is what the orientation of that windbreak is.
Okay.
So it's kind of east-west, but north-south.
Okay, and we did address the drifting around the windbreaks. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I think we will bid you all adieu. Okay, so it looks like people are saying thank you, and we thank you as well. Thanks for all of your questions. And I just wanted to mention before we sign off here that you can find the recording of today's session, as well as the recordings of our other webinars, articles, and videos, and more at eextension.org/organic_production. And also a quick note that we'd very much appreciate if you could fill out our online survey that you will be receiving in an email following today's session. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. That was really interesting research that you're doing, and I want to thank you all for coming today.